un poco.
Yeah. So let me switch cameras. Fabián, do you see the group?
Oh, yes. Let me see. Just, let's see if I can change this. No, like that. Yes, I can see them.
Okay.
In a very small, square of the screen.
Yeah. So this is my friend Fabián Iriarte, who is a poet in Mar del Plata, which is on the coast in Argentina. Lovely little city. Once upon a time, Canisius had an exchange program there. But we used to. It was cool because you lived 2 blocks from the beach, and it was really cool. And Fabián has graciously agreed to share some of his poetry with you. He writes in Spanish, but some of it has been translated into English, and that's what he's going to share with you. And he's going to talk about influences, and he's going to talk a bit about ekphrasis, no, Fabián?
Well, you asked me for poetry that was more focused on LGTB imagery and things like that. But if the idea of ekphrasis comes up, I can discuss it. Yes. Okay. Mostly it's about LGTB images and themes.
Right. And you have a new book that just came out, so there's also that. And yeah, Fabián, I'll let you introduce anything else you want to say about yourself. There's his new book.
Yeah.
My copy has not arrived yet, but
no, I know.
You can introduce yourself a little bit, and then we'll let you talk, and then we'll have some questions, and then there may be food for you in the library. We'll see. I'm working on that.
All right. Okay. My name is Fabián. Hi. I live in Mar del Plata, Argentina. It's a city on the Atlantic coast. And I teach literature at the Universidad Nacional, State University of Mar del Plata. I teach English literature and comparative literature. And I read Emily Dickinson's poetry and Walt Whitman's poetry with my students, and also in comparative literature and in English literature, Anglo-Saxon poetry, Anglo-Saxon epic, Shakespeare, John Donne, Milton, etc. And I've all my life I wrote poetry, and I've been lucky enough to get published. So my latest book is the one that I just show you. I got some copies yesterday, so it's really brand new. But the poems that I'm going to read to you come from this book. I don't know if you can see that. Is that clear? Can you see that?
Yes. Yes.
It's the title is Las Confesiones, and a friend of mine whom I don't know personally, I don't know him in person yet, but he's coming to Argentina for the book fair, the Buenos Aires book fair in May. So we will meet, we will finally meet. He is from New York, but has lived in Madrid for many years now, and he translated all the poems from this book, and it will be published by a small publishing house, a small press, Entre Rios Books, that is in Seattle, in Washington, in the state of Washington. So I'm very glad that that Lawrence, his name is Lawrence Schimmel. I'm very glad that he translated my poems into English, but they're all the poems that I'm going to read come all from this book, Las Confesiones de Confessions. So I don't know if, I think that's enough, right, Richard?
Yeah, you're good.
Okay. All right, I teach my classes in English, but it's different, you know, to teach class in English to Argentinian students, and another thing is to speak to American students. I hope you understand my English. I don't know. Sometimes I'm afraid that my pronunciation is not accurate, but I hope you will understand. And also you can follow the texts. That's why I prepared the PowerPoint. So if I make a mistake, you can always notice, because the poem, the text of the poem is on the screen. So I'll start reading now. And I will explain a little bit, make small or brief introductions to some of the poems, I guess. So these are my poems. The first one, the title of the first one is Cattleya, which is the name of this flower. It's a kind of orchid. And the Cattleya, I first learned about this flower from reading Marcel Proust's À la recherche du temps perdu. It's a long novel in 7 volumes, which in English is known as Remembrance of Things Past, and in Spanish, a la búsqueda de tiempo perdido. So Cattleya. That child who rode his tricycle in his grandmother's house, scaring the floor tiles, black and white diamonds, like in Flemish paintings. That boy, carefree and a little chubby, with his broad and clean smile, who only knew those flowers called Buenas noches, which would shut still fragrant at sunset, much later would read Proust, would sleep with a man when he was 17, would look for love in the wrong places, would be forbidden from staying carefree. Well, you know, this is Marcel Proust. And I got the image of the flower, the Cattleya, from this. This is the first volume of Remembrance of Things Past, An Amour Swan. And it was made into a film many years ago with Jeremy Irons, Alain Delon, and Ornella Muti. And the director was a German director, Volker Schlöndorff. Just in case you are curious to watch the film. The next poem is Dentelle, which is French for lace. Here you have a picture of a beautiful Belgian dentelle, Belgian Brussels lace. I'm like a blind beguine tacking along the edges of your body. With the tips of my fingers, I follow the oh so fine path that your skin marks, or perhaps it's the aroma exhaled by your expectation that guides me to that center, a heart that beats like an unknown symphony, to those eyelids that shadow your black seal brows, to the secret nest of your sex. With my blind touch, I interweave the lace of your cells. I awaken the framework that will shelter this love. My question is if this sweetness between two men is possible. Several of these poems are prose poems. That is, they're not structured as lines of verse. Some of them are, but many of them are just written in prose. Until that day. Until that day, I never knew that one could live like this, with a lightness of the air that barely escapes the plains of the world. I didn't know that by just touching the edge of the paper, the origami of happiness would unfold like a garden hidden behind, that I could kiss him without dirty looks wetting the sense of fear. Who would have said of seeing him then that today he would dominate the course of the stubborn stars, that he wouldn't care about the direction of the monsoon winds because he travels defiant in the breeze, that he'd stand up in the very center of the world, carrying portable pollen dust everywhere. Boys with Boys. This title comes from, in primary school, you have to form a line, a single line, so one line was for the boys, the other line was for the girls. In Spanish, we say los nenes con los nenes, las nenas con las nenas. Boys with the boys, the girls with the girls. Boys with boys. And also, I was inspired by a song by Laurie Anderson. I don't know if you know her, the American performer. There's a song by Laurie Anderson that I imitated the structure of that song. First, they asked if Apple, sorry, I'm interrupting constantly. I don't know whether you know that in Spanish, the nouns, even of objects, are either feminine or masculine, unlike English. In English, you have you can say the table or the tree, and it's the same. In Spanish, the table is la mesa, feminine, and the tree is el árbol, masculine. So there's this question of gender in this poem. First, they asked if apple was female. I said it was. If table, bed, and morning. Then they asked about the tree and the path, about the jackass and the cockerel and the pencil. Of course, of course, of course. And they asked at last if I am female. No, I told them, I am male. But what about the soul? There are doubts about the sun and the moon. There are doubts about death. It's true, but what about the soul? Is it male or female? And sex? They say that sex is male. All right, and in this poem, the title is A Cyber Cafe in Mar del Plata. You probably too young to know that at some point there were cyber cafes, that you could go there and use the computer, a computer in case you didn't have one at home. I think that kind of business has disappeared completely, but when I was younger, there were several cyber cafes. Mar del Plata is the name of my city. And here we have an epigraph, Shopping for Images, that I took from this poem that I like very much, this poem by Allen Ginsberg, A Supermarket in California. And the pictures are pictures of two poets that I imagine I can see almost as ghosts while I am working at the cyber cafe or writing emails at the cyber cafe in Mar del Plata. The first one is Federico García Lorca, the Spanish poet, and the second one is an Argentinian poet, an essayist, Néstor Perlonguer, and I named them in the poem. So, a cyber cafe in Mar del Plata, shopping for images, Allen Ginsberg, a supermarket in California. Shade of Garcia Lorca, what are you doing here? Hidden in the deepest cubicles. And you, Berlonger? Here we are, looking at images, peeking sideways at the naked boys who appear on the screens of the real boys seated beside you, tall, burly, lanky, hairy. Where will we go tonight? What places will we visit? Where does the mouse lead us? We're followed by the manager of the place, jealously attentive. But what screens and what shadows, what lights and what glimmers among galleries of chairs and rows of voyeurs and clairvoyants who don't see clearly and want to take the ship to the other shore to submerge themselves for an hour or two in the river Lethe, where memory is measured in gigabytes and one forgets the outer kingdom of the storm. Okay, this is Allen Ginsberg. This is the American poet. You probably know him or have read poems by him. The author of A Supermarket in California. And this is the supermarket. And this is the poem. I don't think I will read it, but this is the original poem by Allen Ginsberg. You know, instead of Garcia Lorca and Berlonger, he summons the ghost, or he sees the phantom of Walt Whitman. What thoughts I have of you tonight, Walt Whitman, for I walk down the side streets under the trees with a headache, self-conscious, looking at the full moon. In my hungry fatigue and shopping for images, I went into the neon fruit supermarket, dreaming of your enumerations. What peaches and what penumbras, whole families shopping at night, aisles full of husbands, wives in the avocados, babies in the tomatoes. And you, Garcia Lorca, what were you doing down by the watermelons? And the poem continues, you know, summoning Walt Whitman again. So, and here at the end of the poem, this poem was written in Berkeley in 1955. At the end of the poem, you have the river Lethe. This is the river that according to Greek mythology, when you died, Charon would take you on his ship or canoe to the other shore. That is, you went from life on earth to the afterlife. And when you cross the river Lethe, you lost the memory of your earthly life. That was the function of the crossing the river and crossing those waters. And here, you know, this is a drawing by the other poet that I summoned in my poem, Federico Garcia Lorca. He wrote a poem called Canción del Mariquita, the Song of the Sissy. And this is the poem by Garcia Lorca, and this is a translation of that poem. But I don't have, you know, I wrote a poem also inspired by this, but it wasn't translated into English. So I will continue. I will proceed to the next poem.
And just, sorry if I can interrupt, Fabián. In Spanish, mariquita means both ladybug and
sissy, or something like that. Yes, exactly. Here in the translation by Wally Swift, the ladybug combs her hair in her gown of silk. So it has a double meaning, let's say. This is a very short poem. The title is The Kinsey Report. And it has this epigraph: 4% of males are exclusively homosexual throughout their lives. This was something that a conclusion by Alfred Kinsey in his groundbreaking book, Sexual Behavior in the Human Male, published in 1948, right? And the poem, the Kinsey report, goes like this: rotten luck, it had to happen to me of all people. I've only met the other 96%. Things that leave marks. 1, nails that scratch the skin. 2, the stylograph tracing the surface of the wrinkled paper. 3, the rough sound of the letter R between one's teeth. 4, the knife that opens, that cuts and separates, the ebb and flow of the waves, the tides of the light, blinding, dizzying, inundating. 5, the pressure of fingers on keyboards, on backs, on cheeks, on tears. 6, the fingerprint and black ink. 7, the threatening closed fist, raised, grasping air, subduing it. And 8, 9, 10, infinite, you. Damn X. I'm always searching for that damn X because I know that every time it appears, it's to condemn me, generally. Condemn me for being flexible, for my experience, for being extreme and exuberant, for an absurd axiology, for external exigencies, and for prophylaxis, for the saxifrage flower, for the saxifrage flower, for the law, for the duralex. Even God is written with an X, even Sodom and latex, marked here with an X. Damn X of sex, homogeneous and exact, asphyxiating and exiguous X. Damn X. I chose for this other poem as the title, a line from a poem by Susana Tenon, an Argentinian poet. This is like a parody, parody of the poem that she wrote. And it's a kind of an ironic poem. A warbling crowd of a warbling crowd of God knows what has gathered before the church. Why is that man shouting? Why the shouts? That guy, why is he shouting? Who knows? Who cares that shout? Look at the tiny birds in the plaza. Who cares about a few shouts? Who gives a damn? And that other, are they mare or stallion? They must be giving him a kick, a beating, a thrashing. Be careful with your spelling. They threw the blackboard at him. But why is he shouting? How should I know? He might be an adamant catamite. It might be from pain that he can't bear his misery and his deserved punishment for being a sodomite. Then why the hell is he shouting? And also, where did you get that word from? That guy, that shout, that man, one no longer hears. One no longer hears even his name. Must be an old myth, that shout. But why does it seem as if you were still shouting? He must be crazy or mad, lonely or sad, faggot. Remember him? No, he's no longer screaming. Remember? No, you silence him, you and your damned fury. This is a sonnet that I wrote. I don't write regular metrical rhymed poetry usually, but I wrote this sonnet only, of course, in translation. I think that the meter and the rhyme are a little bit lost, and the translator chose to privilege the meaning, the semantics of the poem. And this poem is about the emperor, the Roman emperor Hadrian, and his younger lover, Antinous. And the poem has an epigraph by the French writer, Belgian-French writer Marguerite Yourcenar, who spent the last years of her life in the United States, in an island, on an island off the coast of Maine, if I remember well. And the epigraph is in French, La nuit résout à moi l'énigme qui m'obsède. I don't have the translation for this. It's the night solves in me the riddle that obsesses me, something like that. Sorry, my translation. Myth considered in Hadrian's sadness at the death of Antinous. A vain god who had hope of deciphering his invisible signs was left with the indescribable enigma of his body, nocturnal riddle. Sweet monster, like an inert rose, his bed has become a trap, thorns hidden among the petals. His smooth skin retains the bite of death. In his metamorphosis, his heart has dissolved and his soul is in tatters. His godly lover can no longer find the peace of time, which has fled and does not return. Abandoned and alone in his bitterness, he opened his dark moon nakedness. This poem is the description of a drawing by Lucian Freud. Lucian Freud was a British painter, and he was related, I don't know, he was the grand nephew or something of Sigmund Freud. Description of a drawing by Lucian Freud. The gaze rests upon the naked man lying before the spectator with the violence of the immediate desire that revs the engine of the rapes and gropes and learns 7 kinds of analogies. The first is a coiled serpent that falls on its side, motionless and venomless. Then a pointed tree with a leafy crown, or a broad mushroom hat, a pencil with a blunt point to write, an arrow with a gentle pierce, a staircase, a zigzag between the thighs and the orchids. But desire is always infinite. It isn't content with metaphors, drawings, always desire persists. The Old Grey Poet. This is a pun on that epithet that was applied to Walt Whitman, right? And the poem is a free translation of a scene told by Edward Carpenter, British writer, Edward Carpenter, in 1925 about what once happened between him and Walt Whitman. Edward Carpenter went to the United States to visit with Walt Whitman. And so I took a paragraph written by Edward Carpenter and I translated it freely. And this is what I did. The Old Grey Poet. He approached me and kissed my E. His beak tickled my N. He smelled of leaves and ivy and the forest loam in autumn. I simply lay stretched out in the moonlight that entered through the window, and I surrendered completely to the wonderful caress of the amorous O. After a while, his head moved between my L as his T descended toward my N. And then when he was tickling my B just below my S, and I couldn't hold back anymore, his M closed over the head of my P, and I could at last feel my youthful V flow out towards his O. Editor's note: where it says E, read ear, B, beard, N, neck, O, old man, L, legs, T, tongue, N, navel, B, buttocks, S, scrotum, M, mouth, P, penis, V, vitality, and O, old age. Se enredaron las vergas after reading Walt Whitman in Jorge Luis Borges' translation. And here my translator, Lawrence, didn't want to translate the title of the poem in English because of a pun with the word vergas. And Borges, the Argentinian writer, Jorge Luis Borges, translated several poems by Whitman, and the title here is taken from one of the lines in one of Whitman's poems in Borges' translation. Se enredaron las vergas. So here you have a footnote by my translator. Verga means both the yards, ropes used on ships, but also the penis, especially erect. So the vergas entangled, causing quite a commotion, even more so when those same cocks later entangled up, as one man said, whose consonants were rather irregular. One whose cock, also irreverent, exuberantly expelled those verbs or verses that were his, but also belonged to others. We adopted them. We wanted and set about entangling intrepidly into knots, into nets, diminishing the admonishing finger. If the vergas are entangled, who will disentangle them? Again, the title of this poem, Ya los dos por siempre juntos, is my translation of a line in a poem by Walt Whitman. And the epigraph is man balls, man root, from Walt Whitman's I Sing the Body Electric. And this picture here is a picture by American painter, American artist, David Hockney. And you see that he has painted, two boys or two men, young men, and he has painted the line. So we two boys together clinging, which in my translation into Spanish is Ya los dos por siempre juntos. We two boys together clinging. This is David Hockney, the painter.
Do you remember Hackney from Almodóvar? Yeah.
Sorry, I didn't understand because the voice came, the sound came a little bit.
No, que era una referencia a Almodóvar, que Almodóvar cita mucho a Hackney, por eso.
Okay. Sorry, I didn't understand. All right, so this is the poem, Ya los dos por siempre juntos, or we two boys together clinging. Man's balls are his roots, or perhaps the root of man is the power he believes he holds unlawfully. back and forth, balance in balance. Only man feels so profoundly forsaken, such deep unprotectedness, bodies entangled in their nudity, back and forth eros and thanatos, impulses and tension. They said they were indecent. Let us give up doing it, they said. All attempts to define always lead to difficulty when not to disaster. And here I have Walt Whitman. This is one of the poets that I admire the most. So I plunder his poetry several times. This is the original of We Two Boys Together Clinging. I don't know if you know this poem. I'm going to read it because I like it. And it's interesting because of the use of gerunds, the ing verboids that he uses in this poem. We two boys together clinging. Sorry, maybe you can hear. We two boys together clinging, one the other never leaving, up and down the roads going, north and south excursions making, heart enjoying, elbows stretching, fingers clutching, armed and fearless, eating, drinking, sleeping, loving, no law less than ourselves owning, sailing, soldiering, thieving, threatening, misers, menials, priests alarming, air breathing, water drinking, on the turf of the sea beach dancing, cities wrenching, ease scorning, statutes mocking, feebleness chasing, fulfilling our foray. My next poem is The Task of Naming the Unnameable. Oscar Wilde spent an afternoon in 1882 with Walt Whitman in Camden. Near them, the hyacinths and the violet marrying their perfume. There is no one in this great wide world of America whom I love and honor so much. The unbridled horse, a symbol of sexual energies. You'll whisper in his ear and he responds to your caresses. Juan R. Wilcock recorded in notebooks that the shadow perverts fragments of the colloquy of man with death, as if he wished to give us courage for ourselves as well. Of course, a person cannot be at the same time a great poet and a homosexual. This is conventional wisdom. Mr. Rufus Griswold, how can you bear the exposition of such vileness? Peccatum illud horribile inter Christianos non nominandum. Frankly, you seem a bigot to me. We shall give a name to that sin. Repeat altogether. We shall name the sin. It is not sin. It has no name. It has a name. Accept the name that we give it. 1, 100, 1,000, hundreds, capital letters, lowercase letters, spelling mistakes, burning with pure brilliance and forever.
Fabián, can you go back one slide?
This one?
Can you tell them what the Latin means? Do you know the Latin from this?
Oh, yes. Peccatum illud horribile. That horrible sin that must not be named among Christian people. It's the old idea. You remember that there's this poem by Oscar Wilde, The Love That Dare Not Speak Its Name. It's, so as long as somebody is not mentioned, it's fine. That's the idea.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome. Sorry, I'm going a little fast, but then we can go back and if you have questions or something like that. I think this is the last poem. I'm not sure now, but I think it's the last one. Anyway, No, and there's another one. So this is Law of Myself, and of course I took the title of this poem. It comes from Walt Whitman, one of the two epigraphs here. Frank O'Hara, another American poet that I love, and I have translated some of his poems. In one of the poems, he says, "It is the law of my own voice I shall investigate." And Walt Whitman, in another poem, "No law less than myself owning." In this poem, "We two boys together clinging," there was this line. So from the coincidence of the idea of the law of myself in both poets, I wrote this poem. We always realize too late when what's needed is to see ahead, to foresee, prevent, not to cure wounds, but instead to avoid getting hurt or to wound the enemy, a mortal wound. Oh, the terrible doubt of appearances. Oh, the transparent flight of the flame in the night. Article 1, obey my own voice. Because when we begin to understand things, or we barely encourage ourselves to understand them, they've already changed a few times. The rerum natura, how elusive things are, how unthinkable, what simply happens without caring about us, because that is the first law. Article 2, pay attention to each loss. It will give you strength to commit the assault and revenge. Don't worry about what happened, but what will happen. The future is imperfect. Article 3, investigate the law of my own voice. This is the law I shall obey and respect, shattering the known maps, navigating the terra incognita, turning over every stone. In the transparent flight of night, I am trying, preparing, rehearsing the way of living the possibility of future. In the middle of the ruined shapes and falls of the present, I shoot a fistful of fire. And between them, it happened. Between them, everything happened. Bridge, erections, fire, how late it's grown, don't leave, sleepwalking lights, painted lady butterflies, pins, all is vanity, veil of tears, sodomitic ashes, cities of the plain, found them lacking, with full moon. It happened and kept happening. Next, bird, fish, which translates as foul seafood, as I say, of everything. New York shoal, we two boys, we two boys, we two boys together forever. And that rhythm sustained between you and I. Tongue happened between one and the other. A permanent translation takes place and an exchange of infinite recession, which is extremely difficult to elucidate. What else happened? Negligence of tongue, which Hans Sossi states is closely tied to poetry and has affinities with philosophy and logic. Bridges, flames, erections keep happening between them. Why anything else? And this is a picture of my translator, Lawrence Schimmel, who lives in Madrid, Spain, but is originally from New York. And the bridge here, the image of the bridge, because I think this is a perfect metaphor for translation, you know, to build, to bridge gaps, to build bridges between languages and cultures and ideas. So thank you, muchas gracias. There you go. Thanks.
We have time for questions either from those online or from some of you, if you'd like to ask Fabián any questions. Unfortunately, he doesn't have all of his poetry translated. There's other things that I have shared of his before that, but they're not translated yet. So have to get Lawrence to translate more of your poems, Fabián.
Sorry, can you sorry, the sound comes a little
We're 2 continents away. It's okay.
okay. Sorry.
No, that you need to get Lawrence to translate more of your poems.
Not yet, because we're still waiting for Entre Rios Books to publish the confessions, and then maybe Lawrence will translate more poems. I don't know, but we're waiting for this book to be printed and what's the word, released, or something. And I met the publishers. They live in Seattle. One of them is Argentinian, and the main editor is American. And what I met them when they came to Argentina, first to the book fair in Buenos Aires in 2019, I think, or 18. And they came to Mar del Plata to visit with me. We met for the first time, and we were very enthusiastic about the publication of the book. But then the publication was due on October 20th, 2020. You all know what happened. And then there was a fire in the publishing house, so they had to rebuild the building, their offices. So 2 catastrophes have delayed the publication of the book, but hopefully the book will be out this year, late this year. And then I will meet with Lawrence at the Buenos Aires Book Fair in mid-May. So maybe I might ask him whether he is willing to translate more poems. I don't know.
Any questions for Fabián? Yeah, and you might have to get closer to the speaker box and say who you are.
Hi, I'm Lindsay. Can you hear me?
I cannot see. Yes. Sorry. Yes.
Okay. I was just wondering how you picked which poems to get translated first, and like in what order you wanted them translated.
No, I didn't. I didn't choose the book. It's just that Lawrence had. I don't know whether I sent him the book or he bought it. He travels all over the world because he goes from book fair to book fair. Frankfurt, one day he's in Frankfurt, the other day he's in Guadalajara, all the book fairs in the world. He's very active as a translator. He lives off his, is that the right expression? He lives off his translating job. And so he proposed to translate all the poems in this book, and they are translated in the same order as in the original book, in Spanish, the Confessions. I have another American friend who was a librarian in Swarthmore College. I think that's in Pennsylvania, if I'm not wrong. Swarthmore College, and then he visited. He traveled to Turkey, to Istanbul. He fell in love with the city, and so he's been there. Living there since 2008, and he has translated some poems, but he has chosen them from different books of mine. So he has a more scattered selection. I don't know how to say that. But I never choose which poems should be translated. I prefer the translator to make that choice. I hope that, thank you, welcome.
Hello, I'm Naomi,
Hello.
and I would like to ask, how does the poetry community treat the LGBTQ community?
How, can you repeat the question? Sorry. How is the poetry?
Community treat the LGBTQ community?
Sorry, I guess I didn't understand one or two words from your question. Maybe Richard can translate. Sorry.
Ella quiere saber cómo trata la comunidad de poetas a la comunidad LGBTQ en Argentina.
How the community of LGBT poets.
Sí, cómo la comunidad de poetas trata a la comunidad queer en Argentina.
I'm not sure I understand exactly the how can I say, the direction of your question. Because I see it the other way, you know, how the LGBT community deals with gay poets or something like that. But your question is the other way around, how poets treat the LGBT community. Is that right? I guess, yeah, okay. That's a hard question to answer. You mean in terms of if there's any problem of communication, or if I don't know. I think that let me say this, and then you can ask me further. I think that the LGBTQ etc. community in Argentina embraces poetry, embraces, you know, accepts and likes the fact that much more poetry is being written now, or maybe the gates are more open now for the reception and reading and writing of poetry related to this community. So I think it's a good moment for this kind of poetry to be written and published and read. And there are, you know, readings, public readings, smaller public readings, bigger public readings, and so I think, and it's not just the poetry, it's just that the in general, you know, there are essays and books and academic books and novels and short stories and all kinds of books, a whole literature that helps build a literature that I think it's helpful, you know, the same way that maybe you noticed that it was helpful for me to read the poems by Whitman, the poems by Perlonger, by Garcia Lorca, Frank O'Hara. I think there's something that it's not only the aesthetic value, which is, you know, for me, it's the highest value that you can have in literature or in the arts, but then there are other things like the fact that you can identify with certain themes, certain voices, certain perspectives. You know, you find a kind of closeness, brotherhood, sisterhood, you know, in when you read or you listen to that kind of poetry. I'm not sure if I have answered your question. I don't know.
You did.
I hope so. Okay. Okay.
Any other questions for Fabián? Yeah, okay. También Lupita y Claudia, si quieren hacerle preguntas. Yeah.
Hi, my name's Andrew, and a couple questions. One is, how old were you when you first started writing poems? And two, how has your poems kind of changed in themes since you've started?
All right. I understood very well the first one, and I will need a little help about the second question. Sorry.
No problem.
De cómo te has evolucionado como escritor desde la primera vez hasta ahora.
¿Cómo me he?
Evolucionado, cambiado.
Okay, right. And the first question was about the, how old I was, when I first wrote poetry or something like that.
Yes.
Okay, all right. I've been writing poetry since I was very young. My mother was a teacher, a primary school teacher, and there were books in my house, and also I learned how to read. I learned reading before I started the primary school. How do you say primary school in the States? I don't remember. Primary, elementary school. Okay. So I knew how to read. So I was voracious as a reader. And then soon enough, I started imitating and copying some of the poems that I read. I don't know why I chose, it's something that you don't do consciously, but I chose poetry as my genre, I would say, more than just narrative, short stories or novels. So I guess that I wrote my first poems around when I was around maybe 12, 13, something like that, 14. I don't remember exactly. And then the second part of the question was about the development or something like that as a poet, or
evolucionando, mejorando, cambiando tu forma de escribir.
Yes, it's hard for that question is hard to answer, because usually it's the other person that sees you better than you see yourself, that you notice changes in yourself. But yes, I think that my first poems, the kind of poetry that I wrote at first was very different from the kind of poetry that I'm writing now. And nowadays I'm experimenting. One book is not exactly, doesn't follow the same style, doesn't have the same style as the next book, and so on. Again, it's a mixture of something that I do consciously, but also something that is unconscious about that. But about another difference between the first poems is that usually in secondary school, in high school, you read more canonical poetry, more established poetry. And in Spanish literature, or literature written in the Spanish language, you have we have different dialects, right? Spanish is not the same in Spain, in Argentina, in Uruguay, in Colombia. It's different varieties. And one of the varieties, one of the major differences between Spain's Spanish and Argentinian Spanish is that we use, instead of tú, we use the voceo, voz, and in the present tense, and then the verb you know, when you conjugate the second person singular in Argentinian Spanish is different. But then I read much poetry that came from Spain, and so I imitated that poetry. And so in my first poems, I used the tu form, the two verbal pronoun and the verbal forms that go with tu. To give you an example, in Spain you say tú haces algo, you do something. Tú haces. In Argentina, vos haces. It sounds quite different. For an Argentinian reader, you know, there's a kind of closeness, familiarity with vos haces in opposition to tú haces. It sounds distant. It sounds, I don't know, different, right? Like alien a little bit. So that's one of the changes. I decided at some point to write in with our use of pronouns. And when I sometimes from time to time I write a poem with the two form, but that's usually an ironic use of those forms, humorous use. You understand? It's more ironic. It's to create some effects of distance, of humor, etc. That's one example of some of the changes, you know, along all these years. And also, well, another change is the openness about certain themes and subject matter. That's also an important thing, you know, because first you imitate what other poets have written, and then you assume your own voice, you know, the law of myself, you know, in the poems, your own voice and your own themes and your own images, and so that's a big change also when you start exploring something that feels closer to you, to your life, etc.
Any other questions? Lupita, Claudia, Daria?
Yo sí.
Hi,
Hola, Fabián. Hola. ¿Puedo preguntar en español?
Yes, but let me try. Sí, pero dame tiempo para traducir.
Ok. Te felicito antes que nada porque cada vez me sorprendes más. Esta vez lo sentí con mucha musicalidad los poemas, como pudieran ser parte de una canción. Nadie te ha propuesto ponerle música a alguno.
So first of all, let me introduce you. This is Lupita, who's a former student, graduate of the master's program in Puebla, where we do still have an exchange program, by the way. And you may have seen her in some of the other activities we've done for different classes. So her question was about, and actually she took a class with me where Fabián was also a lecturer in Spanish. The question is about the musicality of his poems and that they seem very musical, and if anyone has thought of putting them to music. ¿Verdad?
All right. Respondo en español y después Richard traduce, ¿no?
Bueno, okay. Dale, sí, dale.
Bueno, sobre la musicalidad de la poesía, antes de esta reunión por Zoom, le decía a Richard que yo estaba un poco nervioso porque no leo generalmente mi poesía traducida al inglés, sino que la leo en español, en el idioma en que yo escribí los poemas.
So he was about doing the class because he doesn't usually read his own poetry in English. So he was very worried about how that would translate, if you will. Yeah.
Sí, porque la musicalidad en poesía tradicionalmente se asocia con dos cualidades o tres cualidades de la poesía, ¿cierto? Una es la métrica o el ritmo, cuando el poema no está escrito de manera métricamente regular, pero tiene un ritmo. Y también con la rima y los sonidos de las vocales y las consonantes. Esas son las dos o tres elementos o factores que tradicionalmente se asocian con lo que se llama the music of poetry, la música de la poesía.
So the musicality of poetry, right, is founded on three things: the metric style, even if it's not written like a traditional sonnet, there is still the rhythm, right? And then the question of the rhythm of the language and the sounds, right? And when it's in English, it's those things change. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Rhyming pattern, and
Right.
the meter, and also the pauses, las pausas que se hacen, ¿no? That's why I was a little bit nervous. Por eso que estaba un poco nervioso por leer los poemas en inglés, porque estoy haciendo bilingüe, porque me resulta más fácil seguir o crear la música, es una metáfora, ¿no? La música de la poesía en mi propio idioma. Sé cuándo hacer las pausas, sé qué entonación darles a los versos y sé qué palabra exacta en un verso, qué palabra enfatizar, which word to stress, right? To emphasize. Entonces es más fácil para mí leer en español.
Yeah, for him, reading in English loses the sense of when do the pauses come, right? How do you make the intonation sound authentic and natural, and what to emphasize and how to emphasize, and you saw him kind of stop occasionally and like restart. So for him, reading them in English for him loses a musical perspective. Yeah, más o menos así, ¿no?
Sí, porque la intonation in each language is key to creating a certain rhythm, a certain atmosphere, right? The pauses that you make, the words that you stress, or the phrases that you stress, you give more emphasis to one over the other, etc. So I think the translator has done an excellent job. In some cases, el traductor hizo un trabajo fantástico. Lawrence es fantástico. In some cases, there were some puns, wordplay. Hubo algunos retruécanos, juegos de palabras, which he could solve, in English, translate into English. And this is something that he created, not me. That's why I consider translators as essential, essential for this communication, because they have to work with it's not just a question of looking for words in the dictionary and just writing them down. It's what they do is to recreate the poem in English. But of course, the poems in Spanish and the poems in English sound different. Suenan diferentes, ¿cierto? Sí. Pero le presto mucha atención, Guadalupe, a lo que se llama la música de la poesía. Quizás yo no uso esa metáfora de la música, pero entiendo de qué se trata y es una de las cosas a las que más les presto atención, y en los poemas que elegí creo que se nota esa atención.
I mean, he basically said in Spanish what he was saying earlier. Anything else? No? Claudia, Lupita, algo más? Well, thank you, Fabián, for your time.
Thank you.
And
I enjoyed being here with you, the students, Guadalupe. So thank you for inviting me.
and I will send you your book soon.
Thank you.
Okay.
And I hope my book arrives too. Claudia Sanchez Hermoso. Thank you, Claudia.
So yeah, he
I'm
doesn't
really-
like me to pay him. I have to send him books. That's how I pay him for class visits. Well,
All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.
bueno, chao, chao. Hablamos, okay?
Ciao. Yes.
Chao, hablamos.
Chao, Lupita, chao.